The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then.
What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it? Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Oh.
Yeah, great to have you with us for the Football Show. Now, I must say, as we were enjoying Nathan Twinkletoes Collins do his thing in Poland, it was a crisis-prompting 4-0 defeat for England at home to Hungary. If not crisis-prompting, certainly not ideal to have Molloy Stadium chanting "sacked in the morning" and you don't know what you're doing to their beloved Gareth Southgate, which is what happened. And English media today awash with "should Gareth lead us to Qatar?" So 2 games out from World Cup. It's a fairly extraordinary turnaround, all on a Nations League week. I mean, Martin O'Neill, he could have told you, Gareth, these things are important. Jonathan Wilson is going to join us later on this hour. But first, to the Twinkletoed Collins. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent is home from Poland. Dan, hello.
Hi, Joe. How are things?
Very well. Can't help but notice, Dan, Ireland's scoring a lot of good goals lately.
Yeah, I was thinking a couple of years back, was it the year where Shane Duffy scored, where they just had to change the rules of the goal of the year competition because they couldn't get 3 goals because Ireland had only scored 1 in the year. I think it was his header against Bulgaria 2020. So they had to broaden it out to any goals scored by an Irish international team. Sort of reminds me of that year 7 or 8 years ago where the Young Player of the Year award, the Young Senior International Player of the Year award was complicated by the fact that I'm not sure they had enough eligible players who actually under the age of whatever it was played, so they had to put the age limit up. And even then, you were looking at someone being nominated for playing 10 minutes off the bench in one game. So under a lot of headings, it's different now, where actually the goal of the season or the goal of the year thing actually might have to be sort of returned back to its initial state. You know, you have to have just the men's one, you have the women's one. You don't have to include like underage games or whatever just to fill out the fact that Ireland haven't scored. But yeah, to be in the stadium for Collins, I have to say, was a sort of a giddy moment. I don't really get, I'm very much like don't react in the press box. That would be my mindset. And yet sort of 3 times in the last week, I've sort of had to give that sort of shocked reaction of did that just happen? And more so laughing. And last night was one of those ones that I just found myself laughing at the sheer sort of, I don't know, the impotence of it all, even just the fact that the outside of the foot finish was just the cherry on top to what was already a stunning performance from him. And it was just surreal that this was the next step up.
And tell me this, Dan, what is the Irish goal of the season then?
Oh, I love the Parrott header, and I love the fact that Obafemi built it up. But I'm trying to think which one did I take the most enjoyment of when it happened, and I'm sort of leaning towards the Collins one, I have to say, because just, you know, he steps in to intercept the ball, and he just you know, at that point of the game, he was already so commanding and dominant, and it was almost like watching. You know, do you ever see, sometimes you might see schoolboy football and there'll be clearly one better, bigger player who's just dominant over everyone else and they can like charge through, and yet you're watching him do this conscious of the fact that he's 21 and he's doing it against, you know, a pretty decent international team, if you know what I mean. And I think it's one of those where maybe putting that context on it is probably what makes Collins, for me. Maybe if you showed it to 3 people in America or something who didn't know anything about the players and the stories and behind it, I don't know, they'd probably vote for the Obafemi goal, wouldn't they? The sort of the thunderbolt. But I think for me, just knowing the whole story behind that, I thought Collins. But I don't know. What's your take? Where's your vote going on this in this fictional competition thus far?
I certainly have Obafemi third, even though it was maybe the most thrilling and whoa kind of a moment for obvious reasons. I'd potentially lean still towards Parrott Obafemi. I thought that was the most high quality all-round crafted goal. I mean, look, what Collins did was glorious and so exciting in its own way. And already it's a trademark of his that he likes to step in ahead of his man. He's been doing that across the week and doing it brilliantly. And so he's, I mean, watching it again, even just in advance of chatting to you, he really does step in from a long way out on this occasion, because he reads the fact that the Ukrainian player is not tuned into the pass that's coming, so he can really gamble. And that's, you know, all the hallmarks of his intelligence there are on show. And so he gambles at pace, makes, I'd say, 15-yard burst to intercept that ball. And then he just sort of says, well, I'm moving at pace. I'm going to keep going at pace. And it opens out for him. And the chop with his right foot onto his left knee, I've seen some people say that was deliberate. I don't think that's quite deliberate, to be honest. But I'm with you on the finish. Like Kenny Cunningham in commentary said that there was a certain arrogance to the finish, and you know, and that was what was so lovely about it. He was in total control of his faculties, because it's so. Can you imagine being that age, international football, finding yourself with the ball at your feet in the penalty area for potentially the first time in your life, and you're calm enough to just manipulate your body, take in the situation, and get into such a shape that the outside of the foot finish is beautiful and is the cherry on top. But at the same time, we can go overboard. It's not Luka Modric's outside of the pass kind of right boot. I mean, it was for a player of Collins' level, the execution of that's routine. But what is exceptional is the composure to get himself in the right position to just finish with such aplomb, and to get himself in a shape where that finish for him, as eye-catching as it wasn't actually that difficult. And I loved as well the shot from behind the goal. I'm sure you've seen it on TV, of like Malumbi certainly and one or two others like hunched down, watching from behind, and the moment where he does finish with all the aplomb that you would want. It's just a beautiful thing, and the excitement of this young team who are doing it on a pretty cool stage. I mean, it was a really magical Irish footballing moment. I'm almost talking myself into the Collins goal now, but
Oh, no, Joe,
good chat to have.
You've described, like, I haven't seen that behind the goal, but I think
so
I've now come around to thinking why I think it's the best, because and the Parrott Obafemi link up was magnificent, right? And I know also it wasn't just like two elements, because Parrott obviously got up off the ground and had to embark on the run that anticipated it. But I know, you know, from the Scottish point of view, they'd say, well, the defenders were sort of very slack and sort of ball watching. But like, so Obafemi executed a brilliant pass and had vision, and Parrott, great run and header. But Parrott, I said, Collins had to step in, make the burst, keep his composure. Like, there's so many more elements to what he had to execute. And I know you're saying about Luka Modric, but it's not Luka Modric. It's a centre half who's never scored for his country before, you know? So maybe when I think of all the things he had to do, and also wasn't a great surface as well, which is another thing I would say. Pitch wasn't terrific. So, you know, just like there was sort of some very good Ukrainian players on the pitch who weren't necessarily slaloming through people. They overran it a couple of times in the second half, and they actually struggled at times with it. So, no, I've decided to go all in on Team Collins here now. I think that is the one for me, because, you know, Ukraine could have defended it better, but in some ways it was like, this is an unstoppable force coming past you here, and he did it. Whereas in some ways the Obafemi Parrott one was, you know, a product of some sort of lethargic Scottish display. But, you know, if this is like one of these goal of the season competitions, you end up doing down great goals to have. At least we're not disputing which header from a corner from 6 yards was more, you know, was better, you know, like which comical ricochet off a Serbian defender own goal, you know, which had the, you know, which did Ireland do more to create, you know, which error from an opponent did Ireland do more to force? I mean, if this is the standard going forward for these goal of the season, goal of the year competitions, we'll take it.
I'm happy to have these debates. What about the general performance then? What would you say?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I did. Yeah, I mean, just from being there, like there was no doubt in the first half, I felt like Ukraine started almost with a small bit of a swagger, to the point of we were a bit loose, a bit lax in some ways. You know, there was a few little showboaty touches, and you're thinking, I think they really think this is going to be routine enough in some ways, because I mean their second string had beaten Ireland without sort of withstanding too many punches. But it was just one of those games as it went on. You were thinking, no, Ireland are able to match them here in a lot of departments. And I know the point will be made, and it's a valid one, that for Ukraine, it's the end of a long and very draining and emotional window over so many headings. But I think it's also disingenuous to make that point without reflecting on how many players Ireland were actually missing as well. Frontline players. And I know that the emergence of Collins, the depth of option, how good Dara O'Shea was, Dara Lenihan. But Lenihan hadn't played competitively for Ireland before. O'Shea had a long injury setback. That back three had never played together before. Maybe at most, one or two training sessions working towards this. And to be able to produce a pretty coherent display, starting from there and then sort of carried forward into other positions. I think that was really good. I definitely think, and it felt like more of a proper away game, a bit of an atmosphere, albeit in a neutral territory. But these are the type of challenges that this team is going to have to negotiate if they're going to qualify for a tournament. And they did a pretty decent job. And I find it very hard to pick fault with last night. I think in some ways, it was as rounded a performance as Scotland. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And what I liked as well is that there was a certain pragmatism at times on the ball. They weren't afraid to, and I'm not, I make a point, and I said it to Vinnie Perth last night, there were no hacks of the ball away. There were cultivated passes and clips up the line and into space, and quite often they resulted in Ireland retaining possession. But we weren't stuck overplaying in our own 18-yard box, which can sometimes happen with this team. So it made it very, very difficult for Ukraine at times, which was good. And I thought it was striking as well, Dan, and you were in the stadium, so you may have a better sense of this, but it seemed like at full time, quite a few of the Irish players had hands on heads or hands on knees, as if to say we're a bit disappointed with that. And it was the fans in the stadium who, it must be said, fans in the stadium are always the most supportive of the general populace. Old Trafford still supports Manchester United, whereas it feels like the whole place is on fire online. But the fans in the stadium were almost more upbeat than the players, and almost lifted them a touch, as if to say, we totally get where you are as a group, but we love what you're doing, and you should actually be happy with this, was the message I thought communicated from the stands.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. In some ways, how Ireland approached it. The last 20 minutes, 20 minutes, I think there was a feeling that it was there for them. And I suppose it's the one little cautionary note. I think I've heard this discussed in the last couple of days. I think it might have been yourself, that sometimes, the Irish teams, when everything is on the line, they perform, they have this short-term target. And I think in some ways, getting 6 points from these two games was the way to atone for the disaster of taking nothing from the first two. So in some ways, elements of last night was like the second leg of a playoff or something, where you're chasing it, and it produces that level. And I suppose they had that in Slovakia. They in the Euros playoff, albeit a lot of different players. Even in Portugal last September, when they were still in the World Cup campaign going into it, and they did produce this performance and then get done by the Ronaldo headers. But it was a very live target. And even just chatting to players after, I think this is just how they're wired. They're not sort of thinking about the broader evolution of this team as much as it's there. It's very much, okay, what do we need to do to win, to get back into this group and to top this group? That was very much the discussion. I even try to speak to people after, are these performances about how this is how you get to Germany in 2024? And they're very much, looking at the chance to finishing top in this group now, So I think that's where that came from at the end.
Yeah, okay.
They got it into their head, this was must win. And that's where they're not looking at some big, broader debate. It's very much, this was a game we have to win. And now, to be honest, Ireland's chances of winning the group are pretty remote. Whereas winning that game last night would have put Ireland surreal. It would have been, Ireland, I think, would have been top on the head-to-head. So
yeah,
that's the margins.
You mentioned the back three, for instance, having never played together, and Alan Brown is now our quasi right wing back whenever needed. What jumps out this campaign in particular, man, there are a lot of players available to Stephen Kenny, and he's blooded a lot of players. And that's a great thing to have depth. Of course it is, because we see how frequently injuries arise. But there is actually, given how few games management have going forward before things get very, very serious again, It is actually a bit of a job to establish with a fair degree of certainty what Ireland's best team is and what the best system is. And I think you look at any really good team, consistency of selection and knowing your best team is important. You look at any Premier League team which is struggling, like Spurs and Manchester United this year, you never know what the team is going to be. And as Conte arrives, you start being able to predict a team because it's going well. And that's where Kenny and Ireland would like to get, because we did see a seismic enough shift. Well, seismic's too big a word, but I did say seismic enough. You'll take the point anyway, the way it's intended, in the change of shape. And we saw like the determination even last night to preserve the Molumby, Cullen, Jason Knight midfield, for instance, a sense that, well, at least maybe we can box that off. But there are quite a few things to box off and quite a few partnerships right across the field here for Stephen Kenny and Keith Andrews and company to try and nail down into something that we can all say, yeah, that's the best team.
Yeah, but isn't it? I'm sure if we spoke 2 weeks ago, I mean, I think after the last window, we possibly thought that Ireland were somewhat on the way to doing that with Robinson and Ogbene and Cullen and Hendrick, and maybe what it shows is that in international football you can have these discussions and aspire to it, but actually you probably do need that depth of player pool to withstand it, you know, and that's the thing, like particularly this international year where there's just basically 3 main windows, only 2 competitive ones. From Ireland's perspective, and then, you know, like a gap to November, whereas normally there'll be 5 gatherings a year. It's a weird one. So it's very much like, you know, past the parcel when the music stops, and like who's in a good place at this stage in their life. Like Robinson looked like the answer to me in this window. He looked like someone who was badly out of form and unfit, or certainly not sharp. Does that mean in September, if he comes back and he's suddenly back playing again, does he get back to maybe levels of last year? So maybe, you know, for me, probably Kenny's big mistake in this window, in my opinion, is not necessarily Yerevan, although that was obviously very disappointing. But I do think it's one of those games that sometimes happens if you're, you know, cup shocks happen, you know, lesser teams, surprise teams where they absorb pressure and hit them. And Ireland were a bit predictable and laboured and got what they deserved maybe. It was that he didn't freshen the team enough for the second game, and probably stayed a little bit too loyal to players who he probably thought coming into this window were his first choice players that you always put on the team sheet. Robinson, Hendrick, you know, a few of those that these have done well for me. I want this consistency because Stephen Kenny has always wanted a settled team. He's always worked better with it. But it just so happened that the better options in this window were other ones. So now we can come away from it thinking, well, yes, it now has to be player X and player Y. And of course, that's true in the case of Nathan Collins.
Yeah.
But in others, the variables may change depending on where they're at. But it does show, like early on in his reign, Kenny, you know, he did blood players at certain times, and maybe you're seeing the benefit now. Like people who've played for Ireland will always tell you it might take you 10, 15 caps to feel comfortable. I remember Kenny getting a lot of grief from some of his more high-profile ex-manager critics for playing Troy Parrott a lot, you know, and real reservations about Parrott. And yet now, suddenly Parrott is looking a little bit more comfortable and mature. But I think
I totally agree. And it's been Molumby's best week in an Irish jersey for sure. Why don't we do a mini report card then? Let me throw some of the more eye-catching ones to you and get your brief thoughts. So Caoimhín Kelleher, certainly very calm in the ball. It's weird. Kelleher's got like a more fluid technique on the ball than Bazunu. I'm not necessarily sure it's more effective, but certainly for style points, you don't even give a second thought when Kelleher's on the ball. It's really impressive. We'll come to Bazunu in a second. So Nathan Collins, we mentioned. Shane Duffy, very good again. James McLean versus Enda Stevens is an interesting one for you. Josh Cullen, your thoughts on? Seemed to have a very good campaign again, and Kenny talked about him, I think, in the post-match press conference. Jason Knight, very good campaign. Molumby, we mentioned. When I say campaign, I mean this week, by the way.
Yeah.
Hendrick a step back. Callum Robinson, agree with you totally, and then Parrott and Obafemi almost speak for themselves. But give us the movers and shakers in the Dan McDonnell pecking order report card.
Yeah, I was trying to look at something like this, you know, winners and losers.
Winners and losers. This is why you're in the newspaper business. That's a headline I could never dream of.
I've written for tomorrow's newspaper shows. I'm not sure if I can, I'm not going to scoop myself here. No, I think Kelleher is an interesting one. I mean, just to answer your point, I mean, Kelleher looks more comfortable, but it sort of makes sense because he played outfield for so long in his career. when he was younger, whereas Bazunu has always been a keeper, you know. But Bazunu's brilliant on the ball, but he's more powerful in his physique and his appearance. You know, Kelleher, it's more sort of languid. It's very sort of, you know, graceful when he's on the ball. It's a really interesting clash in styles between the two of them. Yeah, McLean probably has moved ahead of Enda Stevens now. But then I suppose the one thing you would say is, this is my point, McLean's had a great season at Wigan, full of confidence. Stevens, I think he had COVID, didn't have a great year, stop-start at Sheffield United with injuries. So, like, is it a reflection of that? You know, can that flip back round if the club situations go? Cullen, I think, has gone to another level even with Ireland. I thought he was really good last night. It's probably, in my eyes, the best I've seen him nearly play, because he was very competitive in the game. Like, and Ukraine could move it in that department, and he actually was quite imposing and heavy. Like, sometimes you could say about Cullen, he can be quite nice, you know, and efficient, but unremarkable. But I felt there was a lot to how he played last night. I agree with Knight and Malumbi, and I think the question is, does he play going forward with that three, like a 6 and sort of 2 8s, and that this is your shape, or do you need to mix that up for different games? I think, you know, for a game like Scotland, you'd probably go with something like that. But I think the one caution we would take away from it, and I think the last 2 games were incredibly encouraging. But the end game here is Ireland qualifying for a major tournament, and, you know, enduring across a whole campaign realistically next year. It'd be great to get to a situation where you have a playoff, but in reality, it's about Ireland coming in the top 2 in a qualifying group next year. And I think it's great that now this team has had the experience of a big win at home against Scotland, and a good performance away, and they've generally played well against the better teams in the Kenny era. It's almost going to be, if Ireland are the 3rd seeds, it's the 4th seed, it's the 5th seed, it's Armenia, it's all this, where teams have come out and tried to play against Ireland. Ireland have been very good in those matches, but how are they going to then flip round to being a sort of an efficient killer when you're playing against the teams that you're meant to beat, that you're supposed to beat, and to deliver that consistency of performance, that it's not just a reaction to something that's come before. I think that's, to me, look, it's great that last night was a back-to-back display, that they really followed up on. I must admit, I had a little niggling fear that there might be a drop-off from the high of that, and there wasn't. But I think, to me, that's the thing now. It's like, young players will be inconsistent and it will happen, but how they collectively adapt to the games where now they're going to be expected to win, that they have to win. And that's just the small little niggle that you would have when you think a corner's being turned. It's like, well, that's the next step up. And it's great to play where a team is quite open against you and you can exploit them and you can really play modern football against them. And really, really enjoyable game. But there's going to be different types of tests that you have to pass to get to a tournament. And I think seeing how this team responds to that is the next step of their progression, I think.
You mentioned Lenihan there briefly. One of the truly memorable yellow cards, I think, that we've seen in Irish international football. The referee had a hell of an impact on this game. I was thinking back to Euro 2020 when the referees contributed so much to what was a fantastic tournament by just letting things go. And we saw tackles where I kind of felt like I understood the game again, because for a while it was hard to know what a foul was anymore. And it really added that to that tournament. And then, if you remember, we went into the Premier League season and it was like Operation Let It Flow. And then there was like the Harvey Elliott ankle break and a sense of, well, this is what's going to happen if we let the game go too much. Maybe international football is going to make this its selling point and corner the market. We're going to have some good old tackles. Tune in.
Yeah, look, I'd love to know if this was a trend across, just the way it is traveling. I haven't seen too many of the other games in the other sort of groups, but I thought it was a real striking feature. And Kenny even commented, he felt the Ukraine home referee was a bit fussy, but he went out of his way to mention at some stage in Poland about how the ref in Scotland really let the game flow. And a lot of these refs that have been in charge of the games are sort of the second tier refs in the sort of UEFA ladder. But I've noticed that, and I don't know, is it reflective of a general trend that they are being encouraged to do it? And there was certainly a lot of stuff that was waved on that you wouldn't normally expect in this sort of stereotypical view of the international game and play acting and stuff. And it's great. I mean, it was just a really entertaining game last night. You know, okay, it's not didn't have the intensity still of like a, you know, the absolute, you know, your life is on the line in terms of qualifying here. Although it, you know, in periods though it did, like, you know, it had that sort of thrilling end-to-end thing of a game of real consequence, and maybe the refs have contributed some way. I mean, the Lenihan one was classic, but then this is the point about the depth of defence. I mean, I know he's a competitive debutant. It's possible that some Ireland fans watching it last night who maybe just more so concentrate on the Premier League, he might be a relatively new name. You know, they might know a huge amount about him, but he's played over 200 appearances in the Championship, where he'll have played against some you know, Mitrovic and some of the best strikers you'd probably play in, you know, better than you would play at international level. And I actually think that really shone through last night. It's like, this fella's been around the block and captain clubs, and he's not phased. It
was a really good foul. Like, he knew, I'm going to have to foul him, but I'm going to have to make damn sure I stop him because that guy's fast and he's away from me. And it was an experienced foul. I had 30 seconds, so if you could, it would be remiss of us not to mention the fact that suddenly a 20-year-old Irish player in Gavin Bazunu has been signed by Southampton. He had 2 years left on his City deal. They've decided to cash in. So Ralph Hasenhüttl will be working with Gavin Bazunu next season because Fraser Foster's moved on. He went on a free to Spurs. There is a vacancy there. This deal is worth up to, and it may well not get there, who knows, but it's worth up to €18.5 million, I was reading. And this is for a 20-year-old goalkeeper. So it's very impressive. Medical today. Dan, this is great. It gives an extra layer of intrigue to the Premier League season next year. It's brilliant for Bazunu. I'm sure Caoimhín Kelleher is looking at him going, this gives me more thinking to do. And I suspect you'll be saying to your Irish independent paymasters, you know, it's very important that I'm there for Bazunu versus Manchester United, Man City, Liverpool, these kind of games. I need to be there, you know.
I'd like to send to that, Joe. Yeah, it's to actually get back. I haven't been to England in a couple of years, and it will be good. I mean, the thing about it last night, you know, Nathan Collins was exceptional. He was the only Irish player in the pitch who'd been involved in the Premier League in the closing weeks of the season, you know, and you sort of see, well, is it a surprise then that his levels were that, you know, that he was the higher level because that's where he operates? The cream rises. And I think, you know, Bazunu was sort of, it's a terrific move for him. I think I've been travelling today, so didn't necessarily get a chance to do something on it yet, but I think it's fair to say that I think it's been reported, I think I mentioned it maybe last week and it's been speculated, I think Man City are going to have the option to take him back.
They do, the buyback clause,
Yeah, Man City aren't just letting him go and say thanks very much. I think they still have a lot of faith in him, but clearly Ederson is you know, exceptionally good. So it's a bit of a win-win for Bazunu. Go to Southampton, you know, establish yourself as the number one in the Premier League. And if you do exceptionally well, your dream of being number one at City is contractually there as a scenario that might happen if they choose to activate it. But yeah, I mean, Kelleher has been making noises in this window that he's never made before about potentially been looking to move elsewhere, and it can have a domino effect, I suppose. And I think that's always been the hope with what is quite a decent generation of Irish players coming through. And it's very pronounced with the goalkeepers that they're in the same position. But even some of the other ones, like Jason Knight has decisions to make this summer, that they are motivated by each other. Like, they see their sort of peers get to a certain level, get to a certain status, and they start to think, well, I want some of that. And that's the hope. You know, that's what we're hoping, that sort of they can always, the rising tide can sort of lift them all. And that's, and Bazunu breaking out and getting the move that puts that type of price tag on him, that could even start to make other lads think about their situations as well.
Yeah, not bad to be a 20-year-old Gavin Bazunu, I would think. Dan, I know you've moved heaven and earth to travel back and get here on time for us, so we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joe. Take care.
Cheers. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Our football show coverage is brought to you by Sky, proud partner of the women's national football team. Out, believe together, and we can go anywhere. We are talking England 0, Hungary 4 with Jonathan Wilson next.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky, all the football you love in one place. Across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.